Good morning. My name is Meredith Barber, and I'm the interim minister here at Horizon Unitarian Universalist Church. We're so glad that you're joining us this morning, whether you're with us in our sanctuary or whether you're watching on our YouTube channel. Thank you so much for choosing to worship with us this morning. So I have a few things that I want to share with you. I think we heard last week about our congregational meeting that will take place on the 23rd, and that will be both in-person option and also virtual, so for folks who may not want to attend in person. And I also want to let you know that I understand it's the custom here to have kind of a town hall with a board member starting today after the service. If there's any questions that you might have, our board representative is Karen Collins-Nobles, and we also have Rusty, who is in our sound booth. So if you guys can maybe raise your hand, let folks know who you are, who are here in person. Karen's there in the back. So if you have any questions after the service, please see her. We'll have like a little bit of a conversation. Thank you all so much. And with that, let us deepen into the spirit of worship. We gathered together this morning carrying dreams inside of us. Some new and some ancient, they bubble to the surface. Let our gathering this morning be an act of caring, nurturing, bringing that dream to life so that it may live outside of us, so that it may dance and run and sing. For today is about imagining what could be, about remembering that we are awake, and about opening our hearts to the revolution, lest it pass us by. So come, let us worship together. And we'll light our chalice this morning with this quote that we'll hear about later in our worship service from theologian and mystic Howard Thurman. He wrote, "Keep fresh before me these moments of my high resolve." With that, we light our chalice. I invite you to join me now in saying together the words of our affirmation, which is printed in your order of worship. Love is the doctrine of our church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve humanity in harmony with the earth, thus do we covenant together. I invite you to join now in listening to or humming along to our opening hymn, "I Wish I Knew How."
I wish I knew how it would feel to be free. I wish I could break all these chains holding me. I wish I could say all the things I could say 'em loud, say 'em clear, for the whole world to hear. Say 'em loud, say 'em clear, for the whole world to hear. I wish I could share all the love in my heart, remove all the bars that still keep us apart. I wish you could know what it means to be me. Then you'd see and agree everyone should be free. Then you'd see and agree everyone should be free. I wish I could give all I'm longing to give. I wish I could give like I'm longing to live. I wish I could do all the things I can do, though I'm way overdue. If I found I could fly, I'd soar to the sun and look down at the sea. Then I'd sing 'cause I know how it feels to be free. Then I'd sing 'cause I know how it feels to be free.
Thank you, Saj. That was gorgeous. Your joy is contagious this morning. So I think we've all heard us talk about Elevate North Texas as our Share the Plate offering this month, and we're lucky enough to have Jason with us this morning that will talk a little bit about their organization and the work that they do. So welcome, Jason.
Good morning. Thank y'all so much for having me and supporting our mission, and I'll tell y'all a little bit more about the work that we're doing at Elevate North Texas. But first, a little bit about myself. My husband and I moved to Dallas 5 years ago from central, or on the coast of Texas. Tend to call it South Texas, but it's more on the coast between Corpus and Houston. And one of the reasons why we moved up here, my husband was able to retire, and he's too young to completely retire, but he knew something that was really missing from my life was the church aspect, because I am an ordained minister, and I was an outreach pastor at a mega church back home. However, once we came out and started living as our authentic selves, I was told that a person like me should never be in a position of leadership. And I never let that bother me. I continue to serve in different areas and serve on boards and stuff like that. And looking back now, that was God's way of preparing me for this type of role. Because had I not had the experience of working on boards and being part of those boards, I wouldn't know anything how a nonprofit should run. And so we moved up here, and primarily because of Cathedral of Hope, which is in Dallas. We had visited that church 7 years ago, and we looked at each other walking out of that first service and said, God's going to get us here one day. Little did we know it would happen. And I was very fortunate whenever I came out to my family almost 15 years ago now, that they were very welcoming and loving and affirming. However, my husband's family was not, and his dad hasn't spoken to him since then. And, you know, I remember writing in that journal back then that one day I was going to open up a shelter for LGBTQ youth, because I knew that was the very reason why a lot of youth end up homeless or end up taking their lives. And little did I know, again, that God would get us up here. And so when we moved up here and joined Cathedral of Hope, I started volunteering with a new organization that they had just formed called Dallas Hope Charities. And it was focused on feeding the homeless. And started volunteering with them, and it was a few months into it, and the executive director said he was moving to Hawaii, and he thought I was the man for the job. Never expected that. And so the board agreed, and I became the executive director of that organization, and immediately went to work on what it would take to open up a shelter specifically for LGBTQ youth. And so we went to the Alley Forney Center in New York City, Thrive in San Antonio, Lucy's Place in Little Rock, Arkansas, and Larkin Street in San Francisco, and picked all of their brains and said, just asked basic questions about what type of shelter were they, how they get their funding, and all different types of stuff like that. And so I put a report together and presented it to the board, and we opened up Dallas Hope Center, which was the first LGBT-focused transitional living program. So a youth could stay up to a year in that program. Fast forward to the end of 2019, my husband got a job in the Austin area, so I resigned from Dallas Hope Charities. And long story short, my husband was not happy with his job, and we ended up staying here. And so I was very confused and asking God what was going on, because I left a job that I was very passionate about and absolutely loved. And but I still stayed involved, serving at different feeding shelters and feeding programs like Minnie's Food Pantry in Plano, which isn't too far from our house. Especially during the pandemic, I was able to help. And it was when I was sitting on the sofa one day, again, feeling sorry for myself and asking God, like, what's going on? And I heard that still small voice say, you weren't created to just merely exist, do something. And I knew that there was a gap that still wasn't being met, and that gap was, until now, there was no emergency shelter for youth ages 18 to 24, and so I started Elevate North Texas, and this September we were able to actually start housing youth, and from September all the way to the end of the year we served 53 kids, and so which is amazing that this dream that I had is now a reality, but it's also sad that there is even a need for that type of thing. And so our mission is to fill in the gap of youth homelessness with emergency shelter. We provide safe, affirming environment through access to immediate shelter and reunification with family when possible, with the emphasis on when possible, because we know a lot of kids are fleeing toxic or dangerous home environments. And so we believe that there are three main reasons why youth experience homelessness. The first one being family or the home doesn't want them anymore. And this is where we see a lot of the youth coming that are part of the LGBTQ youth community. We had a young lady who was 19 years old. Her parents found out that she identified as a lesbian, and they threw her out. She was staying in the parks for about 2 weeks before she found us. And the night before she found us, she had gotten raped in the park. And when she contacted us, we had a bed available. I went and picked her up and took her to a partner agency so that they could do, the rape kit and file a police report. And then the second reason is someone at home was hurting them. We had another young lady who was stuck with her father during the pandemic, and her father was her abuser. Had been sexually molesting her since she was 12 years old. And during the pandemic, he started bringing over his friends to abuse her. And she called us because she found us on the internet again, and she was on the verge of taking her own life. And she said this was her last call, and immediately I went and picked her up and brought her into our program. And now she's at a women's shelter getting the counseling that she needs to process all of those years of trauma. And talked to her a few weeks ago. She's got a job and doing really well. And then the third reason, home just doesn't exist anymore. Because of the pandemic, a lot of families lost work, and so they just can't afford to house themselves, let alone their children. And so some of the kids are just told, go and fend for yourself. And so those are kind of the three main reasons that we see why youth are experiencing homelessness. An estimated 1 in 10 youth or young adults experience some form of homelessness every year. And our own government, HUD, had no idea how bad it was until a few years ago when they did a specific youth count. Every year, y'all have probably heard of the PIT count, or the point-in-time count that's done. And so they did one specifically for youth. They thought it was in the hundreds of thousands. It ended up being 4.2 million youth that experience homelessness in America each year. And about 5,000 of them pass away or die on the streets each year. That's the equivalent of Columbine High School, the massacre happening every single day and no one doing anything about it. And so it's part of our job is just to bring awareness to this, because the youth, I think as a society, when we think of homelessness, we automatically think of the older chronically homeless that are begging on the side of the street. And the youth blend in so well with their peers. We often refer to them as the hidden population, but they're hidden in plain sight if we know how to look for them. They're in the coffee shops, accessing the free Wi-Fi, libraries, stuff like that. And pre-COVID, we know that DISD reported 4,000 youth within the school district that were experiencing homelessness. So the numbers only have gone up since COVID. 1 of 3 youth on the street will be propositioned for sex within the first 48 hours of being homeless. And we see a lot of that with our youth who come in and say, they were propositioned for sex. And 40% of the youth that are experiencing homelessness identify as LGBTQ, with the number one reason, again, being family rejection. And of the 65 youth that we've served, or not 65, 53 youth, 73% of them have identified as LGBTQ. So that's just quite telling of the climate that we're in, actually, politically and otherwise. 40% of youth experiencing homelessness have gone 1 or more days without eating. We actually had one young man who came in, and his mom had put padlocks on all the kitchen cabinets and was starving him out, trying to starve the gay out of him. And so when he came into our program, all you could hear was his stomach rumbling. And so I immediately stopped the intake process and said, let's go get some food. But it's just crazy to think of all the stuff that these kids are having to go through. So our 3 core programs are, first, our hotel vouchers, where we provide for that immediate need, where they, once they come into our program, we get them in a hotel. They can stay up to 30 days in that hotel room while we're connecting them with our case managers and counselors to see what that exit strategy is going to look like at the end of the 30 days. Some of them already have jobs but don't have any housing, and so they're just stacking up some paychecks. Some need to get on a waiting list at a transitional living program because they're going to need a whole lot more time. So it looks different for every youth. Our second piece, which we're hoping to open up in the month or 2, is our host home program, where we find adults who go through our vetting process and happen to have a spare room and are willing to take in a youth. And so once they've been matched with the youth can stay with that family up to 4 months, again, while we're giving them access to our case managers and counselors to see what that exit strategy is going to look like for them. And then our third piece is our reunification and diversion. That's where we've been able to help a lot of people. It's also the cheapest way to help them, but it's the most time-consuming. But we try to reunite them with family members or friends when possible. We've had people that we've been able to reunite with. We had one with a grandmother who was able to go back to her grandmother in Austin. We bought her a bus pass and got her all the way back to Austin, and now she's working and also helping grandma around the house. So, and then our diversion piece is we've had youth that have apartments but have fallen behind on rent and are about to be evicted. I step in and talk to the landlord and see how we can come to some type of agreement so that they don't evict these youth, because most of them, all of them are working, they just have fallen behind. And so it's just having that line of communication with those landlords and making sure that they know that the youth is actually working to pay rent. And so those are kind of our programs, and we have volunteer opportunities for mentors, even case managers and counselors. We are growing. We are very fortunate to have a small office at Holy Covenant United Methodist Church in Carrollton, which we met here at y'all's Pride event. And so that's where we've started. Of course, we're hoping to expand very soon and hopefully add more beds as well to our hotel voucher program and through our host homes. So thank y'all again for allowing me to come up and speak, and for everything that y'all are doing. And please follow us on social media at ElevateNTX. Thank y'all again.
Thanks so much to Jason for sharing his beautiful story with us and sharing about this organization. The offering will now be joyfully given and received. Our first reading this morning is called On the Pulse of Morning by Maya Angelou. It's a much longer poem, so I've taken an excerpt for our time together this morning. A rock, a river, a tree, host to species long since departed, marked the mastodon, the dinosaur who left dried tokens of their sojourn here on our planet floor. Any broad alarm of their hastening doom is lost in the gloom of dust and ages. But today, the rock cries out to us, clearly, forcefully, "Come, you may stand upon my back and face your distant destiny, but seek no haven in my shadow. I will give you no hiding place down here. You, created only a little lower than the angels, have crouched too long in the bruising darkness, have lain too long face down in ignorance, your mouth spilling words, armed for slaughter. The rock cries out to us today, you may stand upon me, but do not hide your face. Across the wall of the world, a river sings a beautiful song. It says, "Come, rest here by my side." Lift up your eyes upon this day breaking for you. Give birth again to the dream. Women, children, men, siblings, take it into the palms of your hands, mold it into the shape of your most private need. Sculpt it into the image of your most public self. Lift up your hearts. Each new hour holds new chances for a new beginning. Do not be wedded forever to fear, yoked eternally to brutishness. The horizon leans forward, offering you space to place new steps of change. Here, on the pulse of this fine day, you may have the courage to look up and out and upon me, the rock, the river, the tree, your country. No less to Midas than the mendicant, no less to you now than the mastodon then. Here, on the pulse of this new day, you may have the grace to look up and out, and into your sister's eyes, and into your brother's face, your country, and say very simply, with hope, good morning. We come now to the time in our service for meditation and prayer. So I invite you to join me in a moment of silence. Then we'll share the joys and sorrows of our community, have a spoken prayer, and then we'll hear our responsive hymn, Spirit of Life. So join me now if you're comfortable in a moment of silence. We have a joy in our community. Someone says, after reading the book on living, I realized life is more beautiful than I previously thought. Maybe I'll add a joy that someone is listening to me. Loving God, Spirit of Life, we give thanks for moments of connection, for the smiles of strangers, for surprises, for the magic of a child's laughter as she builds a snowman twirling through the snowflakes. Spirit of Life, Help us to live into that space of wild-eyed wonder, open to the magic that each new day brings. For this is what the living do. Today is Martin Luther King Sunday, a reminder of a man who worked throughout his life for liberation and who was murdered for it. May we remember, too, that Dr. King was reviled during his time, told to be quiet, to turn back, constantly accused of being divisive. His message of equality and liberation was always a threat to the status quo. Let this be a sign to us in 2022. We will never regret speaking up and being on the side of justice. This Sunday is another reminder of all the work that still needs to be done for racial justice, for our collective liberation. Work that is all of ours to do, each one of us in our own way. This morning, we pray particularly for our Jewish and Muslim siblings, for all impacted by the hostage situation yesterday, so close to our home. Our hearts are with all impacted and all feeling the pain of this reality. In these times of fear and struggle, help us to love one another. Help us to reach out to those we care about, and help us to remember that we are not alone, for we are strongest when we are connected. For all these things we pray. Amen. Let us now hum along or listen to our responsive hymn, Spirit of Life.
Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea, move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
Our second reading this morning is called We Hold On by the Reverend Teresa Soto. There is a moment before dawn when the night is firmly in charge of the sky. There is no arguing with the opacity that holds both a fertile imagination and cover of destruction. Just hold on. There is a moment when the dream we share is newly born, wet and wriggling in our hands. Sometimes it's true that salvific futures look vulnerable and small before us. We remain unsure. Just hold on. Anything good was small at first. You know that Dr. King said, "I have a dream." It definitely was not the "I have a reality" speech. It was real in a different way that could be felt, that could be shared. They held on. That dreaming speech happened in August 1963. And you know what came before was April, a letter from a Birmingham jail. One moment did inform the other, but the future being built could not be known with certitude. They held on. We gather, Unitarian Universalists, certain only of our power to be human, finding ourselves committed to keeping our worlds and being our covenant. And when we fail to keep our promises, we don't throw them away, labeled as impossible. We take up our courage, we begin again, we hold on. Sprinkled in the wind, we can hear the question: if we are not white supremacy, shaped into religious robes and rituals, then who are we? We are present, both in attention and in the answer. We are here. We hold on. We contain multitudes, not just of questions and contradictions, but also of possibilities. We continue to labor for the creation of community in which all of us, not just each, but every part of us, is welcome in our home of faith. We hold on. So we've spent the past few weeks talking about our personal intentions for the year. So our theme is living with intention for January, about wishes, about making room for new things, letting go of the olds. And today, we move toward our work in the outer worlds. Living with intention also calls us to consider our impact on the world around us. What kind of world do we hope or intend to create? Today, as we said earlier, is MLK Sunday, a day on which we honor the legacy of Dr. King and other prophetic voices in the struggle for justice. There's so much we could say here, much more than will fit into one Sunday, so we'll be continuing the conversation next week, don't worry, and for much of the spring. But I think it's time for us to wonder, what will be our legacy? It's a big question, and it's one we're constantly being pushed to ask ourselves, both by the interim process and also by the state of our worlds. Those two things are kind of working together. But that's the point of living, in a way. As we heard in the reading from last week by Donna Markova, I choose to risk my significance, to live so that which came to me as a seed goes to the next as a blossom, and that which came to me as a blossom goes on as fruit. So what kind of fruit will we like to leave behind? I'll tell you a little bit about what I intend not to leave behind. So for me, and I think for others, growing up in the 90s, there was this sense, when I was first learning about our country's history in school, that we had done it, that we had solved all of the world's problems. The way it was explained to us, it was like Dr. King had a dream, and then he told that dream to a bunch of people at the Lincoln Memorial, and then we solved racism. We did it. We solved it. And of course, part of that comes down to my experience as a white person, that someone can tell you that and you believe them. Of course, it wasn't true. And I don't say that to be flippant, but just to emphasize that I think for so many people in our country, we're starting from this baseline assumption that this issue is in the past, or at least I think we were, that it's already been solved. That's some of the first messaging I ever received around race and racial justice, and I know I'm not the only one. There are so many of these ideas that we have to purge from our consciousness, that the ideas that there will always be enough in this country for people who work hard, that our systems are mostly fair and just, that people are, for the most part, treated equally. We have to get all of that stuff out. I've heard it said that there's no place to start but where you are, and I take comfort in that. We don't have to know everything or get it just right to take the first step. And so we begin at the beginning, unlearning some of these white lies. There are ways in which we've shown up as Unitarian Universalists as allies in the struggle for racial justice. From heeding Dr. King's call to go to Selma, to taking to the streets in 2020 to protest police brutality. And there are ways in which we've dropped the ball. Ways in which we've failed as an association to make good on our commitments to Unitarian Universalists of color. I believe that the struggle for racial justice, along with economic justice and climate justice, are the defining issues of our lifetime. And yet, we who see the world for the way it is, who worry about what's to come, are gaslit, told we are wrong to criticize our country and its systems. I believe that it is kind to tell the truth. And I also believe that dissent is patriotic. I got this from my dad. He used to have a pin that he wore on his jacket during the 2003 invasion of Iraq, when the majority of people seemed to believe that dissent was anything but. And it's a phrase that I've never forgotten. So as I was preparing for our worship service today, I began reviewing the timeline of Dr. King's life. He was ordained and became an associate pastor at 19. He was 26 when he offered the basement of his church in Montgomery, Alabama, to organizers working on the bus boycott. And King soon found himself asked to lead a movement, and he was chosen because of his calm and steady presence, his activist family, and the fact that he honestly had less to lose than some other more established clergy. He was willing to take risks. And we know the rest of the story in varying degrees. The bus boycott was eventually successful. Segregation on buses declared unconstitutional. Then Dr. King and his fellow organizers set their sights on the ballot box, on the right to vote as a means of institutional and societal change. We know the movement was filled with marches and jail cells and sit-ins and singing and violence at the hands of police, of white individuals, and indirectly at the hands of all who said nothing, all who urged King and his people to wait. The thing about those whose lives are cut short, taken from us, is that they never get a chance to change. They are frozen in time just as they were. But King was also beginning to change some of his ideas. He broke with the Democratic Party out of anger at the war in Vietnam and was beginning to expand his activism toward economic justice when he was assassinated in Memphis. And so that brings us to last spring, when Kyle and I went to Memphis for a small in-person gathering at my internship church. And we ate barbecue and walked down Beale Street and sweated more than I think I have in my entire life. And we also went to the Civil Rights Museum. And I had been before. It had been many years, though, and it was Kyle's first time. And you think you know about something. You think you know. But it is so much different to watch actual film of people being beaten for simply marching, for trying to claim the basic rights to which they are entitled. It is different to hear the audio of screams, to see in front of you the names of all who gave their lives for a freedom they would not see. So many of us, as I said earlier, have grown up learning a sanitized version of this movement. And it is only in recent years that we as a society are beginning to wake up to the truth that many of us have always known, that this was a movement born out of centuries of violence, abuse, inequality, and rage. Unitarian Universalism intersects with the life of Dr. King and the struggle for racial justice in quite a few ways. There is the march towards Selma, with police attacking protesters as they attempted to cross the bridge. And James Reeb and his wife watched from Boston in horror. The following day, King sent out a call to clergy around the country to join him in a second attempt at a march. James Reeb and 2 other Unitarian clergy members were heading to eat at an integrated restaurant. He heeded the call, I should say. he heeded Dr. King's call to go to Selma. And so there they were in Selma at an integrated restaurant, and as they left, they were attacked by a group of white men, and James Reeb was clubbed on the back of his head. He died a few days later from his injuries, and Dr. King delivered the eulogy at his funeral. In 1965, 3 white men were indicted for Reeb's murder and were later acquitted. And I share this story just to talk a little bit about the way we don't often get interested in a movement until it affects white people. So a few years ago, a podcast came out called White Lies, an investigative podcast that delved into Reeb's murder. And as a side note, this felt like the perfect intersection of my interests at the time: Unitarian Universalism, true crime, and I believe it was also an NPR podcast. So over the course of the investigation, the hosts interview possible eyewitnesses to the crime, ultimately discovered that the answer was in front of them the whole time. One woman who was working as a secretary at a local business across from the cafe witnessed the attack. She knew the men who had done it, and she waited to speak to anyone about what she saw until the murderer had died. When initially interviewed by police, I believe she said she hadn't seen anything. White lies. And I have to wonder how hard police might have been trying to solve the murder of this minister who came down from Boston to join the cause anyway. Today, many like to point to Dr. King as the kind of leader and person we should aspire to be, to have in our movements. But as I said before, in his day, King was hated by most of white America. We know also that our government tried to sabotage his movement and his life in every possible way, even encouraging him to end his own life. This is part of the story worth remembering, whether it feels comfortable or not. Dr. King also gave the Ware Lecture, and if you don't know about the Ware Lecture, this is part of General Assembly. This is a lecture for ministers, and I believe this is the longest running lecture series in North America, which was started by William Ellery Channing. So Dr. King gave the Ware Lecture to our UU ancestors in 1966, appropriately entitled, "Don't Sleep Through the Revolution." This is a little excerpt from King's words that night. Victor Hugo once said that there is nothing more powerful in all the world than an idea whose time has come. The idea whose time has come today is the idea of freedom and human dignity. And so all over the world, we see something of a freedom explosion, and this reveals to us that we are in the midst of revolutionary times. An older order is passing away, and a new order is coming into being. The great question is, what do we do when we find ourselves in such a period? These words are just as fitting for us today as they were all those years ago. And his answer was, don't sleep through the revolution. Stay awake, open your eyes, and open your hearts. King urged our predecessors to do this by remembering that no man is an island, first of all. Individualism hasn't gotten us to where we want to be thus far. Why are we still going? He urged our predecessors to remember the idea of inherent worth and dignity that I think we do well. He urged them to stay awake through the revolution by refusing to become adjusted or numb to the injustices of this world. In April of 1963, before his famous I Have a Dream speech, Dr. King sat in a jail in Birmingham and wrote these words in response to 8 white clergymen who criticized him and feared the civil rights campaign would cause violence. He wrote, "Beyond this, I am in Birmingham because injustice is here. Just as the 8th century prophets left their little villages and carried their 'Thus saith the Lord' far beyond the boundaries of their hometowns, And just as the Apostle Paul left his little village of Tarsus and carried the gospel of Jesus Christ to practically every hamlet and city of the Greco-Roman world, I too am compelled to carry the gospel of freedom beyond my particular hometown. Like Paul, I must constantly respond to the Macedonian call for aid. Moreover, I am cognizant of the interrelatedness of all communities and states. I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Never again can we afford to live with the narrow, provincial, outside agitator idea. Anyone who lives inside the United States can never be considered an outsider. And I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't hit you with this quote from the letter that I'm sure you're familiar with by now. I must make two honest confessions to you, my Christian and Jewish brothers. First, I must confess that over the last few years, I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in the stride toward freedom is not the white citizens' counselor or the Ku Klux Klaner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted toward order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I can't agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically feels that he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by the myth of time, and who constantly advises us to wait until a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. And so, what do we do with King's words now in 2022, in our time? I think in certain ways we have heeded the call. We are not asleep, I don't think, not by a long shot. And we know that we cannot go it alone. But I wonder still, how many of us have been silent lately, preferring comfort over conflict, preferring comfort even over truth? I think the question today is not whether we are awake, but how to move forward, what to set our sights on next. Sometimes the injustice of the world can feel so big, and we can feel so small. It can be hard to know where to go from here. But as with our spirits, I believe the injustices of our world are all interconnected. Poverty, the way we treat workers in this country, mass incarceration, racial justice, police brutality, they are all connected to each other. And we have our work cut out for us. But we also have folks here at Horizon who are working on these issues, who are doing the work in the community, who are asking the difficult questions. So what about when it all feels like too much? When we feel like the passage of time slipping through our hands and feel as if we haven't accomplished anything? As Teresa Soto reminded us, we have to hold on. It was the I have a dream speech for a reason. And this brings us to the words of Howard Thurman that we heard earlier. Keep fresh before me the moments of my high resolve. This is one of my comfort quotes that I pull out for the hard days in ministry and in life. Howard Thurman would have been a contemporary of Dr. King's father. He also went to India to meet with Gandhi to learn about nonviolence, and it was there that he made his distinction between Christianity and the religion of Jesus. For he believed that the religion of Jesus was about freedom for him and other black folks in America. He led desegregation campaigns in the 1930s, was focused on interfaith and interreligious experience beginning in the 1950s. He believed in the mystical power of silence and was preaching about what we might call the interconnected web since the 60s. And this is his short reflection that I'd like to leave you all with this morning. He wrote, "Keep fresh before me the moments of my high resolve. Despite the dullness and barrenness of the days that pass, if I search with due diligence, I can always find a deposit left by some former radiance. But I had forgotten. At the time, it was full-orbed, glorious, and resplendent. I was sure that I would never forget. In the moment of its fullness, I was sure that it would illumine my path for all the rest of my journey. I had forgotten how easy it is to forget. There was no intent to betray what seemed to be so sure at the time. My response was whole, clean, authentic, but little by little, there crept into my life the dust and grit of the journey. Details, lower-level demands, all kinds of cross-currents, nothing momentous, nothing overwhelming, nothing flagrant, just wear and tear. If there had been some direct challenge, a clear-cut issue, I would have fought it to the end and beyond. In this quietness of this place, by the all-pervading presence of God, my heart whispers, keep fresh before me the moments of my high resolve, that in fair weather or in foul, in good times or in tempests, in the days when the darkness and the foe are nameless or familiar, I may not forget that to which my life is committed. Keep fresh before me the moments of my high resolve. And so I go back to the fruits we'll leave behind, and I go back to how we will get there. And I think the only answer is what Thurman says, to try to keep fresh before us these moments of our high resolve, whatever it is that keeps us going in good or in bad times, whatever it is that helps us to access that prophetic voice that each of us has within us. May it be so. Amen. I invite you to hum along to or listen now to our closing hymn, Come and Go With Me.
To that land, come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land, where I'm bound, where I'm bound. Come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land, where I'm bound. There'll be freedom in that land. There'll be freedom in that land. There'll be freedom in that land, where I'm bound, where I'm bound. There'll be freedom in that land. There'll be freedom in that land. There'll be freedom in that land, where I'm bound. There'll be justice in that land. There'll be justice in that land. There'll be justice in that land, where I'm bound, where I'm bound. There'll be justice in that land. There'll be justice in that land. There'll be justice in that land, where I'm bound. There'll be singing in that land. There'll be singing in that land. There'll be singing in that land, where I'm bound, where I'm bound. There'll be singing in that land. There'll be singing
we extinguish the flame of our chalice, but not our mission to welcome radically, to love boldly, to grow spiritually, and serve courageously. This we do because we envision a beloved community filled with compassion, helping all to thrive in a just world. So friends, my wish for you this morning is that you find a way to keep fresh before you the moments of your high resolve. Until we meet again, go in peace.